The Great Hall of the Synoptic Concordance did not merely house the representatives of 1,000 star systems. It imprisoned them within a cage of crystalline perfection and suffocating silence. Here, at the apex of the spire of Othries, the atmosphere was not recycled air, but the heavy, pressurized weight of history, thick with the scent of ozone and the pheromones of stressed biological life forms. High Justicar Valen of the Ethelgard hegemony sat upon his raised dais, his multifaceted eyes dull with the fatigue that only centuries of failing stewardship could produce. The light of the local binary star filtered through the translucent dome, casting long, fractured shadows across the obsidian table that dominated the chamber, shadows that seemed to claw at the diplomats seated there like the specters of the empires they had already lost. Valen shifted his weight, the chitinous plates of his ceremonial armor grinding with a sound like dry leaves, a noise that echoed disproportionately loud in the hush that had fallen over the assembly. They were waiting. They were all waiting for the news that would confirm their extinction, the final report from the rim sectors where the void harrowers were devouring reality itself, star by star. The silence was not peaceful. It was the indrawn breath of a galaxy bracing for the executioner's stroke. To Valen's right sat Ambassador Kalith of the Sylving Collective, her fluid, aquatic form encased in a hydrosuit that hummed with a low, nervous vibration. Her people were poets, architects of water and light, and they were the first to weep when the news of the falling systems had reached the core. Now her bioluminescence was dim, a gray pulse of despair. To his left was War Master Thrax of the Draconid Imperium, a massive reptilian creature whose scales were scarred from 100 campaigns, yet whose hands now rested on the obsidian table with a tremor he could not suppress. The Draconids believed in strength in the purity of kinetic force, but the enemy they faced had no throat to slit, no capital to burn. The Void Harrowers were not an army. They were a phenomenon, a creeping silence that erased physics, leaving nothing but cold static in their wake. And in the midst of this existential dread, the Concordance was arguing about trade tariffs. It was the absurdity of the dying, the desperate need to cling to the familiar mechanics of bureaucracy while the walls of the house burned down. A minor delegate from the outer trade guilds was speaking, a rodent-like creature with twitching whiskers, droning on about the allocation of hyperfuel reserves in the event of a sector-wide evacuation. Valen watched the dust motes dance in the light and wondered if the universe would mourn them. He doubted it. The universe was vast, cold, and indifferent, and the Ethelgard had spent 10,000 years trying to impose order upon chaos, only to find that chaos had a patience they could not match. "Enough," Valen said. His voice was not loud, but it was projected through the Neuralink collars worn by every delegate, resonating directly in their auditory centers with the force of a gavel strike. The rodent delegate ceased speaking instantly, shrinking back into its seat. "We debate the distribution of fuel for ships that will have nowhere to go. The Harrowers have breached the perimeter wall of the Antares cluster. The reports indicate total signal loss in 3 standard hours. We are not discussing economics today. We are discussing the end of the Concordance." The War Master let out a huff of air, a plume of smoke escaping his nostrils. "Then let us discuss the unknown variable," Thrax growled, his voice a tectonic rumble. "The sensor ghosts in the Sigma sector, the anomalies." A ripple of unease went through the chamber. Valen felt it too, a cold prickle at the base of his neck. For weeks, deep space telemetry had been picking up gravitational distortions in the uncharted zones, regions of space that the Concordance had marked as uninhabitable due to radiation storms and spatial instability. These were not the chaotic signatures of the Harrowers. These were mathematical, precise, impossible. "The ghosts are a glitch," Valen dismissed, though he did not believe it. "Sensor echoes from the Harrower wavefront." "They are not echoes," Kalith whispered, her voice bubbling through the liquid of her suit. "The harmonic resonance is beautiful, structured. It is a song Justicar, a song of mass and energy interwoven. Something is moving out there, something that ignores the radiation storms as if they were a gentle breeze." Valen turned his primary eyes toward her, his mandibles clicking softly. "And you believe this to be salvation, Ambassador? In my experience, the unknown is rarely benign. If there is a fleet hiding in the radiation belts, they are likely scavengers waiting for us to fall, or worse, the architects of our destruction." The chamber erupted into murmurs. The fear was palpable, a living thing that slithered between the seats. The Concordance had ruled the galaxy for millennia because they controlled the hyperlanes, the ancient pathways between stars. They were the masters of travel. But if something could move through the uncharted zones, through the storms that boiled ships alive, then the Concordance was not the master of anything. They were merely children playing in a sandbox while adults walked through the fire outside. Suddenly, the ambient lighting in the hall flickered. The holographic map of the galaxy hovering in the center of the room stuttered, the blue tranquility of the core systems turning a violent crimson. A siren began to wail, a low, mournful tone that signified a Class 0 breach. Valen stood, his four hands gripping the edge of the table. "Report!" he barked at the empty air, addressing the station's AI. "Status report immediately." The AI's voice was typically soothing, a synthetic amalgamation of the most pleasing tones of all member species, but now it sounded strained, the audio fragmenting into static. "High Justicar. Massive gravitational displacement detected. Proximity immediate. Vector the zenith point." Every eye in the room turned upward toward the transparent dome. The zenith point was the space directly above the station, perpendicular to the galactic plane. It was empty space, nothing approached from the zenith. It was tactically unsound, energy inefficient, and theoretically impossible for standard hyperdrives. The stars above them vanished. It did not happen all at once, but rather as if a great dark curtain was being drawn across the sky, blotting out the light of the binary suns, the distant nebulae, the comfort of the void. A shadow fell over the synoptic concordance, a shadow so profound that the automatic lights of the station surged to maximum power and still failed to banish the gloom. The station, a city-sized construct of crystal and alloy, groaned. The superstructure shuddered, not from an impact, but from the sheer tidal force of what had just arrived. The gravity within the chamber fluctuated, datapads slid across the table, and the water in Calith's suit sloshed violently. "Sensors are offline," Thrax roared, tapping furiously at his console. "Optical range only, by the brood. Look at it." Valen looked, they all looked, and for a long, agonizing minute the galaxy did indeed go silent. Hanging above them, eclipsing the local star, was a vessel. To call it a ship was an insult to language. It was a continent forged in steel and silence. It was a monolith of matte gray plating, scarred by cosmic dust and time, shaped like a spearhead that could pierce the heart of a sun. The sheer scale of it defied comprehension. The synoptic concordance station, which housed 5 million souls, would have been a mere shuttle compared to this leviathan. It possessed no visible engines, only a shimmering distortion at its rear where reality seemed to fold in on itself. Along its flanks, lights flickered, not the aggressive red of weapons ports, but the cool, steady white of civilization. There were cities on its hull. Vast, sprawling metropolises built into the trenches of its armor, protected by domes that glistened like dewdrops on a blade of grass. It was not a warship. It was a world that had learned to fly. "Identify," Valen whispered, his voice trembling for the first time in 400 years. "Identify that object." The AI responded, its voice stabilized but awestruck. "Object class unknown, mass exceeds standard planetary parameters, energy output comparable to a Type II stellar civilization. It is hailing us High Justicar on all frequencies, analog, digital, subspace, and steam pressure modulation." Valen blinked. "Put it through, audio only." The static cleared and a voice filled the chamber. It was not the screech of the harrowers, nor the melodic hum of the sylvan. It was a guttural, rhythmic sound, heavy with baritone resonance. It spoke the trade tongue of the concordance, but with an accent so archaic, so thick with the weight of gravity, that it took the translation matrix a moment to catch up. "This is Admiral Sarah Thorne of the United Nations Space Command Vessel Atlas," the voice said. It was calm, terrifyingly calm. It was the voice of a mountain speaking to a pebble. "We apologize for the gravitational wake. Our deceleration dragged a few micro-singularities with us. We are here to answer the distress call of the Sylvan Collective, requesting permission to synchronize orbit and stabilize your local star. It appears to be fluctuating due to tidal stress." The silence in the chamber stretched, taut as a bowstring. Valen looked at Calith. The Sylvan ambassador was trembling, her bioluminescence flashing rapid patterns of shock. "You called them?" Valen accused, his voice low. I sent a prayer into the deep void," she stammered. "An old frequency, a myth from the archives of the precursors. I did not know they were real." Valen turned back to the projection of the shadow above them, humans. The name was a footnote in the oldest archives of the Ethelgard, a species of volatile, short-lived primates from a death world in the Orion Arm. They were supposed to have destroyed themselves millennia ago. They were supposed to be dust. Yet here was a ship that could break a planet in half simply by parking next to it. "Permission granted," Valen said, his throat dry. "Welcome to the Synoptic Concordance, Admiral Thorne. We await your delegation." The arrival of the human delegation was not the fanfare of conquerors. but the clinical precision of scientists entering a quarantine zone. A single shuttle detached from the belly of the Atlas. Even this small craft was the size of a Draconid heavy cruiser, a blocky utilitarian brick of metal that descended with silent thrusters. It docked at the primary spire, the clamps groaning as they struggled to accommodate the mass of the visitor. Valen, Thrax, and Kalith stood at the airlock, flanked by the honor guard of the hegemony, tall, four-armed warriors wielding plasma pikes. Thrax's hand hovered near his sidearm. "They are a threat," the War Master grumbled. "A ship that size is a weapon, Justicar. There is no other purpose for such engineering. You do not build a hammer to paint a picture." "We are about to find out," Valen replied, straightening his robes. The airlock cycled. Steam hissed, actual water vapor, a crude but effective thermal exchange, and the heavy blast doors parted. The humans who stepped through were shockingly small. Valen had expected giants, creatures of bioengineered muscle to match their vessel. Instead, he saw bipedal soft skins, encased in environmental suits that looked woven from a matte fabric rather than rigid armor. They wore no helmets, having trusted the atmospheric sensors. Leading them was a female, her hair the color of steel wool, her face lined with the passage of time. She walked with a cane, a simple stick of polished wood, yet her stride was purposeful. She was flanked by two others, a younger male carrying a heavy slate of instruments, and a towering figure in power armor that hummed with a reactor signature that made Valen's teeth ache. The armored figure carried no weapon, but its very presence suggested that it was the weapon. Admiral Thorne stopped 10 paces from the aliens. She looked up at Valen, who towered over her by 3 feet, and smiled. It was a strange expression, baring teeth, yet it lacked aggression. "Hi, Justicar," she said, nodding her head slightly. "Thank you for receiving us on such short notice. The neighborhood has gone to hell since we last visited." Valen bristled at the casual tone. "You speak of the Void Harrowers, I presume, the extinction event that is currently consuming our borders." "Harrowers?" Thorne glanced at her aide. "Is that what you call them? We call them entropic mites, nasty pests. They eat the binding energy of subatomic particles, bad for real estate values." The casual dismissal stunned the assembly. Thrax stepped forward, his tail lashing. "Mites, they have consumed 12 systems. They are unstoppable. Our fleets burn before they can even target the enemy." Thorne turned her gaze to the War Master. Her eyes were dark, like the void between stars, and for a moment Thrax felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Unstoppable is a strong word, War Master," she said softly. "Everything stops eventually, even us. But yes, for your technology level, I imagine they are terrifying. That is why we are here." "Why?" Valen demanded. "Why come now, after thousands of years of silence? If you possess this power, where were you when the Krell Wars burned the Outer Rim? Where were you when the plagues of Ophiuchus took billions?" Thorne sighed, leaning on her cane. The sound was weary, the sound of a parent explaining a difficult truth to a child. "We were busy, Justicar. The galaxy is bigger than you think. There are threats in the dark that make these harrowers look like dust bunnies. We hold the line at the galactic edge. We keep the fires burning so the universe doesn't freeze. But when we heard the Sylvan song, it reminded us of home, of oceans we haven't seen in generations. We couldn't let the music die." She gestured to the aide, who tapped his slate. A hologram projected between them, not a map of the galaxy, but a schematic of the Atlas. "The Atlas is a Titan-class engineering vessel," Thorne explained. "We don't use it for war, we use it to build stars, to repair gravity wells, to terraform dead nebulas into nurseries for new life. But it has capabilities. We are prepared to deploy a localized stasis field around the affected sectors, halting the entropy decay, and then physically excise the harrower infestation." "Physically excise?" Kalith asked, her voice trembling. "How? They are non-corporeal energy forms." "We have big nets," Thorne said deadpan. Then, seeing their confusion, she elaborated. "We use inverted singularity projectors to give them mass. Once they have mass, we can hit them, and the Atlas hits very hard." The meeting was interrupted by a violent tremor that knocked the delegates to the floor. The lights died completely, replaced by the crimson strobe of emergency backups. The station's AI screamed, "Breach! Breach! Harrower signature detected inside the zenith perimeter. They have bypassed the sensor net. They are here." Panic, raw and animalistic, swept through the alien delegation. Valen scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs. "It is a trap!" Thrax roared, pointing a claw at the humans. "You led them here, you are their heralds." The armored human stepped in front of Thorn, a shield of hard light shimmering into existence from his gauntlet. Thorn didn't flinch. She tapped her earpiece. "Bridge, report." "They followed the wake, Admiral," a voice crackled in her ear, audible to the room. "Class 4 swarm. They're trying to feed on the station's reactor. They sense the energy density." "Defensive posture," Thorn ordered, her voice losing its casual edge and becoming pure steel. "Do not fire the main batteries. You'll vaporize the station. Deploy the kinetic drones, and tell the Hephaestus to spin up the reality anchors." "On it." Thrax was shouting orders to his guards, but it was futile. The walls of the chamber began to dissolve. Not melt, but dissolve, turning into gray dust as the harrowers ate the atomic bonds of the crystal. Shadows detached themselves from the darkness, vague, shifting forms of crackling negative energy that shrieked with the sound of tearing metal. A Sylvan diplomat screamed as a shadow passed through him, and he simply ceased to be, his suit collapsing empty to the floor. "Get behind me," the armored human bellowed, his voice amplified. He raised a heavy rifle and fired. It wasn't a plasma bolt, it was a slug of physical metal accelerated to a fraction of light speed. It impacted the shadow with a thunderclap, and for the first time in history, a harrower bled. It shrieked, solidifying into a twisted, insected horror before dissolving into ash. "Kinetic rounds," Thrax realized, his eyes widening. "They gave it mass." "Move," Thorn commanded, pointing her cane like a sword. "To the shuttle, the station is compromised." The run to the airlock was a blur of chaos. The humans moved with a disciplined efficiency that shamed the hegemony's elite guards. The armored soldier was a bulwark, taking hits that would have flayed a tank, his shields flaring but holding. Thorn moved surprisingly fast for her age, her cane tapping a rhythm of survival on the deck plates. All around them, the magnificent station was unraveling. The harrowers were feasting. They made it to the shuttle bay just as the ceiling began to collapse. The human shuttle's ramp was down, and suppression turrets mounted on its hull were spitting streams of tracers into the encroaching darkness. Valen, Thrax, and Calith were shoved inside by the humans, huddled together in the troop compartment. As the ramp sealed and the shuttle blasted free, Valen looked out the viewport. The synoptic concordance was dying. The crystal spire was turning to gray mist, but beyond it was the Atlas. "Bridge," Thorn said, strapped into a crash seat, her face illuminated by the tactical displays. "This is Thorn. The station is lost. The Council is secure. You are clear to engage. Show them why we don't carry plasma cannons." "Aye, Admiral, engaging gravity shear." From the viewport, Valen witnessed the impossible. The Atlas did not fire a beam. It did not launch missiles. Instead, the distortion at its rear expanded. The ship rotated, presenting its broadside to the swarm of harrowers that were consuming the station. The rings of the cities on its hull locked down, blast shields sliding over the domes. Then the Atlas pulsed. It was a wave of pure distortion. Valen watched as the space between the Atlas and the dying station warped. The light bent. The stars twisted into spirals. The gravity in that sector increased a billionfold in a microsecond. The harrowers, beings of energy and entropy, were suddenly subjected to the physics of a black hole. They were dragged, screaming in radio frequencies, away from the station. They were stretched, spaghettified, and crushed into a single glowing point of superdense matter. The Atlas had weaponized gravity itself. It had turned a sector of space into a trash compactor. In seconds, the swarm was gone. The station was a wreck half-eaten, but the threat had been obliterated, not defeated, erased. The shuttle docked with the Atlas in silence. No one spoke. The display of power they had just witnessed rendered politics irrelevant. When the airlock cycled and they stepped onto the deck of the human Titan, the atmosphere was different. It didn't smell of recycled air. It smelled of rain and soil. They were in a massive hangar that looked more like a park, with trees lining the walkways and a ceiling that mimicked a blue sky. Thorn led them to a transport pod. The journey to the bridge took 10 minutes, passing through layers of the ship that revealed its true nature. They saw manufactories building entire colony ships. They saw schools where human children learned calculus alongside alien refugees Valen didn't recognize. They saw agricultural bays the size of continents. "This is not a ship," Calith whispered, pressing her hand against the glass of the transport pod. "It is a seed." "It's an ark," Thorn corrected gently. "One of 7. We built them when we realized the universe was dying faster than it should." They arrived at the bridge, a command center that looked more like an observatory. There were no chairs for the crew, only standing consoles arranged in a circle around a central pit where a hologram of the local cluster rotated. Thorne took her place at the center. "The immediate threat is neutralized," she said, addressing the stunned aliens. "But the harrowers will return. They are attracted to the decay of your stars. Your civilization burns energy inefficiently. You bleed entropy into the void like a wounded animal bleeds scent into the water." Valen stepped forward. The arrogance of the High Justicar was gone, replaced by the humility of a survivor. "You say you can stop them, you say you hold the line, but this ship, this power, why have you not conquered the galaxy? You could rule the hegemony in a week." Thrax nodded slowly. "With this strength you would be gods." Thorne laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "Gods, no, gods are distant. Gods don't bleed. We are just janitors, Justicar. We clean up the mess. Conquest, ruling, that takes energy. That creates conflict. Conflict creates entropy. Our goal is to extend the lifespan of the universe, not shorten it by fighting over borders." She tapped the console and the hologram zoomed out. It showed the galaxy, but not as the Concordance knew it. It showed the dark zones, the uncharted territories. And there, lining the rim of the galaxy, were 6 other lights, 6 other titans. They formed a perimeter, a shield against the endless dark of intergalactic space. "The twist," Thorne said softly, "is not that we are powerful, it's that we are losing." The room went cold. "What?" Kalith gasped. "The harrowers are not the enemy," Thorne revealed, her voice heavy with a burden carried for millennia. "They are the immune system. The universe is sick, Ambassador. The fabric of reality is unraveling. The big rip. It's happening sooner than predicted. The harrowers are trying to delete matter to conserve energy to stop the expansion. We are fighting them to buy time, to find a way to stitch the wound closed." She looked at Valen, her eyes pleading. "We didn't come here to save your station. We came here because your sector is the next fracture point. If we don't stabilize this star system, the rift will open here and it will swallow the core worlds. We need your help, not your ships, not your guns. We need your minds, the Sylvan understanding of harmonics, the Ethelgard administrative logic, the Draconid resolve. We can't fix the universe alone. We are just the muscle. We need the architects." Valen looked at the hologram. He saw the tenuous line of white lights holding back a tide of infinite darkness. He realized then how small his life had been, how petty his disputes. The galaxy had gone silent not out of fear, but out of the sudden, crushing realization of the scale of the game they were playing. "You want an alliance," Thrax stated, his voice respectful. "Not of nations, but of survival." "I want a crew," Thorne said. "The Atlas has room for 500 million. We can save your populations. We can integrate your technologies, but we have to leave the station behind. We have to leave the politics behind. We are moving the line." Valen looked at the other two. Kalith was already nodding, tears floating in her helmet. Thrax unbuckled his sidearm and laid it on the console, a gesture of submission and trust. "The hegemony is dead," Valen declared, his voice firm. "Long live the coalition." The integration began immediately. It was messy, difficult, and fraught with cultural friction, but the image of the Atlas crushing the harrowers had burned itself into the collective consciousness of the galaxy. The Silent Galaxy became the moniker for the era that followed, a time when the wars stopped because everyone was too busy looking outward, toward the rim. Weeks later, Valen stood on the observation deck of the Atlas. The ship was moving now, leaving the synoptic system behind. He watched as the Atlas deployed a device into the dying star, a stellar injector that would stabilize its fusion cycle for another billion years. It was a parting gift. Admiral Thorne joined him. She wasn't using her cane. The lower gravity of the deck seemed to ease her pain. "It is strange," Valen mused, "to be a passenger in one's own galaxy." "Better a passenger than a casualty," Thorne replied, watching the star flare bright and healthy, turning from an angry red to a stable yellow. "You said there were 7 ships," Valen said. 7 titans holding the dark." "Yes. And what happens if one falls?" Thorne was silent for a long time. She looked out at the velvet blackness, at the distant stars that were no longer just points of light, but responsibilities. "Then we build another," she said. "That is what humans do. We build, we break, we fix. We don't know how to give up. That is our curse, and that is why we are going to win." She turned to him, and for the first time, Valen saw not a soldier, but a visionary. "Ready to get to work, High Justicar." Valen looked at his reflection in the glass, superimposed over the reborn star. "I am ready, Admiral." The Atlas turned its prow toward the darkness, its engines lighting up the void like a second dawn. The galaxy was silent, yes, but it was the silence of a held breath, the silence of a billion souls watching, waiting, and hoping as the Titan sailed into the storm, carrying the fire of civilization into the endless night. The wars of conquest were over. The war for existence had just begun, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy wasn't afraid of the dark. It was afraid for the dark because humanity had arrived, and they had brought a sledgehammer to a knife fight against entropy itself. The silence was not an end. It was a beginning, a blank page upon which the united species would write their defiance against the dying of the light. And leading the charge, quiet, colossal, and terrifyingly efficient, was the Atlas, the ship that made the galaxy hold its breath. The sensors on the bridge pinged. A new rift was opening in the Andromeda sector. Thorne didn't even blink. "Helm," she ordered, "set a course, maximum burn." "But the G-forces," the pilot warned. "Let the inertial dampeners handle it. We have a universe to save." As the Atlas vanished into slipspace, tearing a hole through the fabric of the universe to heal another, Valen finally understood the human philosophy. They did not fight to win. They fought because the alternative was boring, and in a universe of infinite entropy, boredom was the only true death. The stars watched them go, and if stars could feel relief, the galaxy sighed. The humans were here. Everything was going to be complicated, loud, dangerous, and utterly magnificent. The silence broke, replaced by the roar of industry, the hum of collaboration, and the stubborn, rhythmic beat of a human heart, amplified to the scale of a god, echoing in the void. Not today. Not today. Not today. And the darkness, for the first time, recoiled.